Hey friends, it's John. You're the JRB Tree Climbing Channel, also the name of my Facebook group, my Facebook page, my website, and my Patreon should you wish to support me in my journey with safe climbing. This is a hunting saddle, and I have it oriented as if I was sitting in it. So it has no bridge on it. This is my right bridge loop. This is my left bridge loop. Here's the waistband sitting down and the leg straps up. So you could picture yourself sitting in the saddle and looking at your right and left side. It has no bridge on it. And I'm going to be showing you 10 devices and at least 50 configurations of those 10 devices for adding a simple, fixed, redundant bridge or second bridge. So for background, when you buy a saddle, it comes with one bridge. But if you've seen some of my prior videos, you know that I recommend the use of a second bridge. This is my design for a double adjustable bridge. There's two bridges and this works fantastic, but it's a little bit much for a new climber to endeavor, and they don't actually need all of that. They could simply fashion a redundant bridge out of one of these many methods. Now, so why would you want a redundant bridge? Well, if you're a rope climber, it's really nice to have two separate and independent points of connection onto your climbing rope. And if you are a user of the Munter friction hitch, like I recommend, it's really nice to have a second bridge to place the Munter on using a large pear-shaped carabiner on your other bridge. It's really nice. But there are emergency scenarios where anyone could lose their footing. See my video, Self-Rescue After Loss of Footing, where someone might need a second bridge to rescue themselves and ensure they don't get stuck in a tree. And so it's important for every climber to have the ability to either have a bridge already on your saddle or the ability to create one on the fly. I did a survey in my group recently and asked folks what their preference was, and there was a great amount of variation. 40% of the team preferred a redundant bridge, which has some level of detachability. The one I just popped on is detachable on both sides. And about half of the team preferred something adjustable. But here's an important point. Just because something is detachable and because it's made of a fixed device like this, it doesn't mean we can't adjust the length. So let me remove my load carabiner and let me just take this simple redundant bridge I just added, and I can simply double it by running it through that bridge loop, and I've just shortened it. So don't think of something as being fixed as in terms of its structure is also being a fixed length, because we can double it and we can triple it, and we can ensure that it's not removable. This is removable but not losable, because I've got a girth hitched here. It could be shoved into my saddle bag here, and it could have this carabiner, the load carabiner. I can rig it on there in such a manner that it can't fall off, because I can thread it through and separate these two strands, and I can ensure that that won't fall off, and it's in a transverse orientation. So I'm going to show you 10 devices that you can use to create a redundant or second bridge with a fixed device. All of these designs require the use of carabiners. So I'm not going to go into detail, but you need locking carabiners. On my bridge, in terms of assuming load, I like a large pear-shaped carabiner like this one. There's a link to it on my website. But this video is going to last a lot longer than some of the products we may be buying today. So keep your eye on my website, and I'll always send you there for product picks. In terms of the means by which it attaches to our bridge loops, there are various carabiners we could use for that. Here is a double action. I really love this for a lineman's belt because it's a double action. It won't open here and it won't open there, but if I squeeze both of these, that works great for a lineman's belt or a temporary bridge. But there's all sorts of great carabiners, including these really small ones that I do like, because I like the ability to get my bridge really tight in some applications, and I like a carabiner like this one, which is optimally small. Today, for purposes of demonstration, to keep things moving, I'm just going to be using a non-locking carabiner, but be aware you should be using a locking carabiner for your bridge, and there's plenty of great opportunities and suggestions on my website. The first simple device that you can use to create a redundant bridge is a sling or a runner. So these are all sewn slings. This one is 1-inch tubular webbing. This one is Dyneema. This looks like 2 centimeters, but these are all rated for climbing. And we can make a redundant bridge out of either of these. And we can do so in a number of configurations. So this is one device, but I'll show you multiple configurations. So first option is pretty straightforward. Take a carabiner and place it on each side. So I've got myself a redundant bridge. If I don't want to lose it, I can leave that connected. I can double it in this fashion. But I don't really need 2 carabiners, right? I've got other options. I could have doubled it that way, right? There I've got a redundant bridge. But if I don't want to lose it, maybe I'd like to girth hitch it on one side. So let's do that. Let's girth hitch it here. There's another configuration, right? There's a configuration. Loop it around, it's doubled. You want it even shorter, it's tripled. There are applications where I want just a very small amount of space here for my attachment to the tree, such as when I am hitch climbing. Device 2 is an eye sling. Now you can purchase these sewn. I don't happen to have one sewn, so you can purchase one. There's a link on my website made of a similar material where an eye is sewn at each end. So as you'd expect, it's not as strong because it's only the load is being placed on only one side, but it gives you some greater degrees of flexibility. So here I have tied my own with a length of nylon webbing rated at 4,000 pounds. I would trust my life on this. And I have options, right? I could use a carabiner on both sides. That's pretty straightforward. But I can girth hitch it on one side. Now, the advantage of using this configuration is really just in the amount of adjustability. Again, it's not really being adjusted, but the amount of fine-tuning I can get in my length. So I've got a pretty good length of webbing here. This is a pretty good sized bridge I just created. But if I want to really fine-tune the length, there it's doubled. There it's tripled. There it's quadrupled, and I still can keep going. So by having a single rather than a double, and it's just getting stronger as I do so, I have more options for configurability. It doesn't matter which one of these you choose. It just matters that you choose one and have it with you and have it at the ready. Okay, device number 3 is very similar to number 1. It's also a loop of webbing, but this one I tied myself using a water knot, or in this case a double water knot. See my video on tying the water knot and double water knot. Now, why is this different? Well, because I tied this, I had an option. If I never want to lose this, I just want to stick it in my saddlebag, I could have tied it capturing my bridge loop. Now, I'm not going to untie and retie it because you can picture it. Picture this just tied around there. And you've got yourself a secure connection on one side, and then you can carabine it here. And of course, all of the other options remain in place. If you didn't tie it on your end loop, then you can simply use it the same way you saw this sling a moment ago. It's just, if you didn't want to purchase a sling or you had a piece of good webbing, you've got this option as well. There it's doubled and you can keep on going. Okay, device 4 is an eye-to-eye prusik or an eye-to-eye cord. So these devices are purchased for use in creating friction hitches like the Mishikan and the Distal and others. And they're all sewn and rated and appropriate for the application. They come in different lengths. Let's take the longer one here and let's see what we can do to create a bridge out of this. Well, if it'll hold my weight in a prusik, it'll hold my weight in a bridge. So I can take a carabiner on each side and turn it into a bridge, right? That's pretty obvious. I could double it. I could just take it down to one carabiner, or I could keep going. Now it's tripled. Now it's quadrupled. And if you're using it in either doubled or quadrupled mode, you only need one carabiner to do so. Only need two for the odd configurations. But there you go. If you've got a eye-to-eye prusik and it's not being used, you've got yourself an emergency redundant bridge. Item number 5 is a sewn prusik loop. So here I've got a 6mm TRC sewn prusik loop from Rock and Arbor, and much like the other loops, we've got our options available. Carabiner on each side, of course, is an option. I can girth hitch it on one side and connect it here. Or let's say I wanted it a little shorter, or let's say I wanted a little bit more grip. Well, I can form, instead of a girth hitch, I can keep going and make this a 2-wrap prusik, which is, by the way, a good amount of grip. But I could keep going. If I wanted a little shorter yet, I could keep going and make it a 3-wrap prusik. Maybe I just wanted a tiny bit shorter for whatever application. This is how, just good examples of how your configuration of a fixed length device can help determine its length. Get that fixed up. I've got myself a really nice and compact bridge. And of course, this prusik can be removed. If I wanted to arrive at my length in a different way, all of the other options I just showed you are available. We can tie it here, or we can double it this way. We've got all those minor configuration changes will allow us to utilize this prusik loop as a redundant bridge. The next option is 2 short prusik loops, and I have to admit I didn't come up with this. One of the gentlemen in my Facebook group did in our recent survey. Mr. Butel came up with this option, and that's simply to, instead of one longer prusik loop, let's leave it in place. Let's have 2, one on either side, because we don't really need our redundant bridge to pivot. We don't need it to pivot. It can be fixed in place. So I'll tie this one with 2 wraps and the other one with 1. But what's my point? Well, we can take our load carabiner, and that's all we need. We've got ourselves a way out of the tree with 2 prusik loops that can stay on our saddle and really not get in the way. That's really not going to get in my way, right? And if I ever was worried it was going to fall off, well, I could get a cable tie. I can get a cable tie and put it on there, and it'll always be there ready for me to go. All you need to do is have your carabiner, and it could be on here as well. So I really like this option, and it'll always ensure that your carabiner for your munter is centered in the middle of your saddle. Just like we tied 2 prusik loops here, what else could we tie in their place? We could tie 2 longhorn hitches. So here I have a pre-tied longhorn hitch, and I can use it much like I did a prusik, except it has the advantage of cinching better. And I could put one here and cinch it down. And let's say that was a little long. I wanted another wrap. I'll take another wrap. And the nice thing about the longhorn is it cinches, right? So this will stay in place. I like that better than the 2 prusiks, one on either side. And of course, this is still removable, but if you wanted to take no chances whatsoever, and I will bore you by making you watch me tie a longhorn in real time, see my separate video on tying the longhorn. But I think it's important that you see how long it takes me to tie these things in real and practical applications where I'm tying this right now in a transverse fashion. It's not right side up. It's sideways. Of course, I've rehearsed this. I tie them a lot, but you can do the same. I am not a magician at tying knots. I just practice it a lot. So here I've got a longhorn, and it is attached on my bridge, and I'm much less likely to lose that than a Prusik loop. And of course, you could tie one on the other side. So a lot of options for a pair of longhorns. In one of my first videos for adding a redundant bridge to a tree saddle, I showed how you can take a simple length of quality cordage, put it through both bridge loops, form a hunter's bend, and you've got yourself an improvised redundant bridge. And that is extremely stable and will stay in place. But it might annoy you. You might want it to be removable. So we've got options, right? With just that same length of cord, if we don't want to lose it but we want it removable, well, we could just tie it on only one side. Can't lose that. And add a carabiner. We've got some options here. Look at these long tails. What if I wanted that a little shorter? I always want to cut more cord and tie with more cord than I'm certain I need. And now I'll grab my carabiner, and of course I can tie that. I can run that singled. I can run it doubled. And depending on the length, I could make it all the way to triple. And of course, the other option is to simply tie this in a completely removable fashion. I'm simply, much like I tied a Prusik loop earlier, I tie a hunter's bend here on this length of cordage. I think I'll even make my ends the appropriate length. I know you can't follow all of my knot tying, but you've already got background on how to tie the knots. You've got the videos. Now it's time to start using the tools in our toolbox. Okay, here we go. Let's tie a girth hitch here on one side. You don't want to lose that. You could always, if you're not ready for tying the longhorn, you could always put a piece of cable tie there, but you've got the ability now to run this either in this mode. Let's see if we know we can get it doubled, and I don't know if it's too short to get tripled. Probably a little short, but we got our tails a little long. We could always lengthen that. You get the idea. Just a length of cordage, quality cordage rated for the application, can become a lifesaver. And no surprise, but in the opening I showed you how a single longhorn can also be a bridge. Now here I have attached my single longhorn onto my double action carabiner, so I can girth hitch it on one side. I can attach it, I can double it, I can potentially triple it. But we have options for this single longhorn hitch in terms of what we can do with it. So one option would be to utilize it as a soft shackle. So here I've got the same device. You know that the longhorn is capable of being transformed into a soft shackle with either a hard toggle or a soft toggle. In this case, and in most cases for life safety, I'll always take the option of using the hard toggle. But this is an incredibly strong device, and I can take load right there. And I can run this in a doubled mode as well. So, in terms of, we want to minimize the number of things that we're carrying for emergency purposes. We always have an emergency carabiner. And if you're carrying a longhorn for rigging, well, it can also be your redundant bridge. And of course, you have the option to run that in soft mode. These tails are just a little bit short. See my video introducing the longhorn hitch and soft shackle. And just because I have it, here is a crazy long horn hitch. This was tied with 5mm cord, 10 feet of it. So what would I do with something like this? Well, if I happen to have it, let's say I was using it for another purpose. Well, I can effectively girth hitch it on one side. Now maybe you don't feel comfortable with 2 strands of 5mm holding your life. But if you do the math, if you run this in doubled mode, you now have an adequate safety factor for an emergency bridge. But the nice thing, it's not very bulky. You can triple that and you can quadruple it pretty easily. So depending on what you have and why you're carrying it, you can convert this into a redundant bridge as well. And the 10th and final option is simply a length of rope. What if all I have is a length of rope? Can I use that to create a bridge? Quite easily. Now, my first prototype here, this happens to be 7mm cord, and I wouldn't go with less than this. But on the end, I've tied a figure 8 end loop. See my video on that. I've got it long enough to afford me the ability to tie a girth hitch on one side. And on the other side, I've got options. And the nice thing about our ability to master the poacher's knot is if I want my bridge exactly a certain length, we're so good at tying the poacher's knot that we can pick that distance right out, pop on a carabiner, and we've got ourselves a bridge. And of course we can double it as such. Now, using a poacher's knot or a scaffold knot, I like it on a carabiner, right? I like tying a poacher's knot on a carabiner. Why? Because even after a really good load, even though you can't untie it, you can get this, with a little bit of elbow grease, you can pop that carabiner off and then you can spill this. But not so if you tie a poacher's or scaffold knot here on your bridge loop, because you can't slide this off. So I don't recommend it there. What kind of knots can we tie on our bridge loop directly? And there are a number. So let's start there with the poachers. So if I were to tie a poacher's, and I'm going to tie it and then back off. See my video on the poacher scaffold and overhand noose knots. If you crank down on that, trust me, you'll have a hard time getting it off. So what have I learned? I have learned that if you, it also won't stay in place real well, but if you take a few wraps around this, so if I go around this 3 times, I think is optimal. It's around the bottom once, twice, 3 times around the bottom. And now you form your poachers. And you can do it this way, or sometimes I just run right up the line. It's actually a misformed poachers, but it's still double overhand knot. This one I can typically untie, and I'll show you how. So I've got an extra long tail there. So when this gets cranked tight, I can always break it. I can always kind of break it and wiggle that just enough that with some strength here. It's a little tough sometimes. I can still get this off without needing to worry about cutting it off. It's snug, but it's possible. If you want it to be a little easier, and if you want your bridge to really cinch in place here, I recommend using a clove hitch. Instead of just simply 3 wraps, we make a clove hitch here. How do you make a clove hitch? Well, see my prior video on the clove hitch, but it also goes around the bottom 3 times. That's once. Then I go around the second time, I cross. Then I go around a 3rd time and come up through. And we'll inspect that. But that is a clove hitch. If I take that around the other side, you will see that that is a textbook clove hitch. And this will stay in place. This will stay in place. But I'll still secure it with effectively a poacher's knot here. So 1, 2, I've got an extra long tail. But that configuration is generally, You know, again, a little bit of finger strength to remove it, but it'll stay in place on your bridge loop. Crank that down. All right, what other options? What if I'm just testing things out and I don't want anything difficult at all? Well, any of our other secure hitches are capable of being used, including the quick release and exploding hitches, but they have to be locked. They have to be locked. So let's say I wanted to take 2 wraps this time, 1, 2. Well, I can now tie what I call running highwayman's hitch here. That works. See my video on the running highwayman's hitch, but I have to lock it. I have to lock it. I'll crank that tight. You know, I'd spend a little bit more time getting all that out. I might put a cable tie on this to make sure it can't ever be released, but when you want to release it, you can. The Maverick hitch, I'll take one more wrap. The Maverick hitch and the running highwayman's are extremely similar. See my video on the Maverick hitch. It's simply that I start it this way. You can tell I don't have quite enough slack. So here's a Maverick hitch, and I've locked it. Looks remarkably similar. Take the slack out, orient it where you want it. That's an option. I can't say it's my favorite, especially if I'm planning on leaving my bridge on for months or a season at a time. Why would we want something that's that easy to remove? I'll fight with it once a year if I have to remove it. And even if I had to cut it off, it's not the end of the world. So I do prefer the more secure options. And if you wanted something that floats around really easily, yes, you could tie a figure 8 end loop capturing this, or you could tie a secure bowline such as the Scott's Lock bowline. All right, let's tie a Scott's Lock bowline. See my video on Scott's Lock bowline, but it's a secure end loop. And we've got that in place. And of course, we can mix and match and do this on either side. So these are all, and there are more, right? There are a number of fixed anchor knots that we can use here. I don't know if we got to 50 yet, but we're darn close. I'm going to wrap it up. Remember that even though if you're not a rope climber, you still may need a redundant bridge to get yourself out of a jam if you ever lose your footing and you find yourself caught in a tree, hanging from a rope, hanging from a rope man, hanging from a stuck rappel device. We're going to need a second means of attachment to our rope. It may only happen once in your career, but we don't want that to be your last hunt. Please remember, Murphy's Law likes to be exercised, and problems have a way of compounding themselves. So make sure you don't ever get yourself in a jam. Now stay tuned. I will be giving you some other options for adjustable redundant bridges. These are all created with fixed devices, although their length may be variable based on configuration. Thanks as always for your support.